He killed her husband in front of her, then raised the gun again. Marry me or join him. Elena chose survival, signing a blood-soaked treaty with the city's most ruthless mafia boss, Adrian Moretti. But the real threat isn't the man holding her captive. It's the shattering truth about the husband she buried. The rain lashed the city like an unending punishment, thin silver needles streaking across windshields and glistening black asphalt. Streetlights flickered against the storm, neon signs smeared into ribbons across the wet night. Somewhere close, sirens wailed, then faded, leaving only the heavy drum of water and the echo of thunder rolling off high brick walls. In the back seat of a car, caught in that storm, she was frozen. Heart racing, lungs clawing for air that tasted of gun oil and fear. The pistol hovered inches from her face, its black mouth as steady as the hand that held it. The man's eyes were cold, merciless, pale as Arctic glass. His voice carried no rage, no heat, only precision. "Marry me," he said, the words soft and unyielding. "Or join him." At her knees lay the man she had thought would grow old beside her, his chest torn open, his blood carried away in rivulets down the cracks of rain-slick concrete. She pressed her trembling palms against him, desperate and useless. The gun did not waver. The storm swallowed her scream. Hours earlier, the world had been warm. Elena Vale twirled the stem of her wineglass, eyes catching the dim glow of a candle that flickered between her and her husband. The restaurant was modest, the kind of tucked-away spot they both pretended was their little secret, though she suspected half the hospital staff knew about it too. A string of old jazz records spun softly from behind the counter, brushed snare drums and muted trumpet weaving through the murmur of dinner conversations. Mark was animated tonight, leaning across the table with that easy grin he had always been able to conjure, the one that had charmed her back when they were both too young and reckless. He slid a tiny wrapped box across the table with exaggerated flair. "No peeking," he teased. She laughed, shaking her head. "You're ridiculous. Open it." The paper tore easily, revealing a simple jewelry box. Inside, a silver chain cradled a small heart-shaped pendant. It wasn't new. She could see the faint scratches, the dulled shine, but her chest tightened when she realized what it was. "You found it," she whispered. "The one I showed you last month. In the pawn shop window." Mark winked, proud of himself. "I notice things." Emotion welled behind her ribs. She unclasped it, fastened it around her neck, and leaned forward to kiss his hand. "It's perfect." The candlelight softened his features, casting him in a glow that almost erased the fatigue lines around his eyes, the stress he'd been carrying for months. She wanted to hold onto that moment, to the normalcy of it, to the illusion that they were fine. But then his phone buzzed, a vibration against the wood of the table. Once, then again, insistent. Mark glanced down. Something flickered in his expression, gone almost before she could name it. His grin faltered, then returned like a mask being adjusted. He slid the phone half under his palm, thumb tapping quickly. Elena tilted her head. "Work." He nodded too fast. "Client." "Nothing urgent." Her brow furrowed. She knew his consulting work was irregular, a mishmash of deals that never seemed to add up. "On our anniversary?" "Don't start." His voice had an edge now, quiet but sharp. He swallowed it down with a sip of wine and forced his smile wider. "Let's just enjoy tonight, okay?" She didn't push further, though unease prickled along her skin. She lifted her glass and let the conversation drift back towards safer ground. Funny stories from her shift, their daughter Emma's obsession with drawing animals lately, but her eyes kept darting to the phone. When he excused himself to take a call outside, she caught it. Just a glimpse, a single line of text still glowing before he locked the screen. "You're late." The words stuck in her head like a splinter. The rain had started by the time he tugged her out of the restaurant, muttering something about needing to meet a client quickly, about it being safer if she came too. His hand was tight around her wrist, not tender but urgent, dragging her through puddles that splashed against her ankles. The city had turned sharp with shadows. Alleys stretched like open mouths. Windows glowed with indifferent light. She tried to keep pace, her heels slipping against slick pavement. "Mark, where are we going?" she demanded, breath fogging. "Just trust me," he snapped, eyes darting jaw tight. She pulled against his grip, panic whispering at the back of her mind. But he didn't stop until they reached a dead-end alley, its walls tall and damp, graffiti bleeding under rain. A steel door creaked open. 3 men emerged. The first was unmistakable. He carried presence like a weapon, his tailored suit unmarred by the storm, his dark hair perfectly slicked back. His eyes, icy blue, cutting, landed on Mark, then slid to Elena, and in that instant, she felt exposed. No. Adrian Moretti. The name itself was enough to still her breath. She had heard it spoken in whispers at the hospital, always accompanied by warnings, by stories of what happened to those who crossed him. He didn't speak immediately. He let silence stretch, filled only by the drip of rain from gutters above. Then he lifted a leather ledger and tossed it onto the ground at Mark's feet. The book slapped wet pavement, pages splaying open, neat columns of numbers inked in precise strokes. "Skimmed," Adrian said, his voice smooth and razor-sharp. "Product missing. Cash rerouted. Offshore accounts growing fat." Mark's face drained of color. He raised his hands, palms open. It's not what it looks like. Don't," Adrian cut him off. "Don't insult me." His gaze flicked briefly to Elena, then back to Mark. "You sold my shipments. And worse." His voice hardened. "You tried to sell her." Elena's chest seized. "What?" She turned to her husband, searching his face, desperate for denial. But what she found there wasn't outrage or confusion. It was fear, shame, truth. "No," Mark stammered. "No, I never." But she already knew. She felt the crack run through her world, splitting it wide. Mark's hand twitched toward his waistband. Adrian didn't hesitate. The gun barked once, deafening in the alley's walls. Mark convulsed, crimson spreading across his chest, and collapsed hard onto the stone. Elena screamed, dropping beside him. Her hands pressed against his wound, futile against the tide of blood. His eyes fluttered once, then dimmed, leaving only emptiness behind. Her husband was gone. The storm swallowed the sound of her breaking. The air stank of copper, of smoke, of rain hitting hot asphalt. She was shaking, drenched, her palms slick with the proof of death. And then the shadow fell across her. She looked up. Adrian Moretti stood over them, his pistol unwavering, his gaze colder than the rain. "Collateral," he said evenly. "He sold you too." Her breath came in ragged gasps, her tears mixing with the storm. "Marry me," Adrian continued, his tone without hesitation. "Or join him." The words struck like a hammer. Why a marriage? It made no sense. Her mind reeled, grasping at fragments of logic, of survival. But the gun didn't care for questions. The ultimatum hung heavy. Her voice was barely a whisper when it came. "Why me?" Adrian crouched, his eyes never leaving hers. Rain traced the sharp cut of his cheekbones, glistening on the steel of his watch. His cologne, bergamot with the faint tang of gun oil, cut through the damp. "Because you stop a war," he said simply. "The rivals wanted you. Through you, they would claim leverage. Through me, they get nothing." Her heart thudded painfully. The image of Emma bloomed in her mind, her little girl asleep at home, clutching a stuffed rabbit, breathing evenly, blissfully unaware. If Elena died here, Emma would be swallowed by the system, by the kind of men who circled like vultures. She couldn't let that happen. Her lips parted, her body trembling but her gaze steadying under his. "I'll marry you," she whispered, her voice raw but clear. "On my terms." For the first time, the faintest curve touched Adrian's mouth. Not quite a smile, not quite victory. Something sharper, unreadable. The pistol lowered, and with it her entire life shifted course. The rain continued to fall, merciless and unending, washing the alley clean of warmth, of love, of everything she had thought was safe. But she remained alive, bound now by a choice she had never wanted to make. SCT2 The house smelled of lemon oil and rain, like old wealth scrubbed clean for company. Somewhere above, a grandfather clock told noon and swallowed its own echo. Servants moved like careful ghosts through marble corridors, their steps softened by rugs the color of dried blood. My footprints marked the foyer, damp and obvious, because he'd taken my shoes at the door, a gesture that looked like courtesy and felt like a search. Nana Lucia came from the far end of the hall carrying something bundled in her arms as though it were alive. She was small but straight-backed, her hair winter white, her eyes the gray of early morning before the sun decides to rise. Her black crepe dress rustled faintly as she walked, coral beads catching the light at her throat. "Elena," she said softly, a smile in her voice though not her mouth. "The rain follows you, Pavara. It follows everyone tonight," I murmured, because anything else would have been a confession. She unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay a veil, not modern tulle but antique illusion, the color of yellowed piano keys. The edge was trimmed in delicate needle lace, each leaf and curl a testament to a woman with impossible patience. "My mother's," she said. "She wore it in a church whose windows were blown out. Dust drifted down the aisle like confetti. She told me the veil kept grit from her eyes, so she could see my father clearly when she said yes." I swallowed. "Is this for me?" "For us," she corrected, the word carrying both gravity and comfort. "A family veil protects, or it is no veil at all. Call it superstition. But superstitions kept us alive when laws would not." Her hands, steady as the sea, lifted the veil and draped it over my head. The lace smelled faintly of lavender and old wood drawers. In the gilt mirror I saw a ghost bride, softened at the edges, made to look like someone who could forgive. I did not forgive. A door clicked. Adrian entered with the precision of a clock striking its hour. Today his suit was charcoal with threads of blue that revealed themselves only when the light leaned closer. A faint bruise under his eye had turned the color of weak tea. The pistol at his shoulder was holstered openly, leather creaking faintly when he moved. A rule, not an apology. His gaze swept over the veil, then caught mine, assessing. "Lucia," he said, brushing the air by his grandmother's cheek with a European kiss. To me, only a nod. "The registrar arrives in 20 minutes. A second man followed with a slim case and a stack of documents clipped in brass. He placed them reverently on a polished table, opened the case, and drew out a fountain pen. "I am told you prefer to read everything," Adrian said. "So read." I approached. The first page was a contract stitched from barbed wire. Non-disclosure clauses, guardianship contingencies, asset protections heavy as castle gates. In the margins were neat notes in a precise hand. Rafes, I guessed, pointing like arrows to places for signatures. I lifted my eyes. "Are there any sections here not knives pointed at me?" His voice did not change. "There are sections that are bandages. A bandage stings before it heals." Nana touched my temple gently. "He is his father's son in paperwork," she murmured. "In other things we pray not." I read line by line. "Nurses learn to distrust pretty words when the body beneath them tells another story." Paper bled too in its way. In the middle of clauses meant to bind me like barbed wire, one line startled me. "No physical contact without explicit invitation." A rule of consent, spelled out in ink. I looked up too sharply. His brows twitched a fraction higher. "You asked for terms. You have terms. You expect me to believe you'll honor it?" He slid the pen toward me point first, a small surrender. "Obedience is cheap. Desire has value." My hand trembled, but I steadied it on the table's edge. "Then here's mine. You keep your men away from the hospital. No business near the ER. No blood through those doors." "Agreed," he said instantly, no haggling. "I already moved street action 2 blocks east. Hospitals are bad optics. They make too many widows." The joke landed cruel. My lips pressed tight. Still, I signed. Initialed until the letters blurred into nonsense. The fountain pen whispered across paper like a cricket in a storm. When I finished, the man with the case collected the papers as though they were scripture. Adrian reached as if to adjust the veil, then halted in midair. His palm opened. Empty. Permission, he said simply. Every instinct screamed no. But survival required small, strategic surrenders. Yes, I whispered. He lifted the veil slightly, enough to see my eyes unobstructed, careful not to let lace graze my skin. An odd gentleness, precise as a scalpel. The registrar arrived moments later, a short man with damp hair and a leather folder hugged to his chest. Behind him came Rafe, broad and solemn, and Lucia, who slipped quietly to my side. A radio somewhere in the house hummed low with a Latin hymn, notes of smoke and stone. We gathered in the chapel off the library, under angels painted long ago who stared upward, bored with heaven. The registrar intoned vows, his pen scratching like a small animal against paper. When asked if I would, I inclined my head once. Adrian said, "I will," flat as stating the hour. No rings, only ink. Ink lasts longer. We signed the register already heavy with names that thought paper could alter fate. Rafe signed next, his large hand steady. Lucia's signature swooped like a gull over water. Adrian turned to the witnesses, his voice shifting into the one I'd heard in the alley. Final, surgical. This union dissolves old debts. This house holds what it vows. Message sent. Rivals would hear it. When the registrar departed, silence pressed in like snow. Lucia folded the veil carefully, her hands gentle as if the lace could bruise. She whispered to me, "Bravery does not always feel righteous. Sometimes it feels like eating breakfast when you wish you were dead." Her words stayed with me as Adrian led me. No touch, just the open path of his body, to a private elevator paneled in espresso wood. The ascent pressed my ribs tight, air thinning. The doors opened on another world. Glass walls revealed a city drowned in rain. The penthouse sprawled in gray lines and pale oak floors, bookshelves breathing dust and leather. In one corner, a black piano gleamed like a docked ship. I drifted toward it without thought, my fingertips brushing its curve. My old upright at home had stuck keys. This one sang even in silence. "This is yours," Adrian said behind me. "It's yours. Then be wrong in your favor." He placed a keycard on a console table. The click of plastic on would rang louder than an oath. "It opens every interior door. Not the elevator. Not the exits. Freedom inside the cage." "Thank you for the cage," I said bitterly. "I prefer honest metaphors. You will be safe here. I would have been safe at home." "No," he replied, gentle as a diagnosis. "Home is the first place they would search. Love leaves evidence." The word burned between us. I ignored it. He walked me through the suite. A bedroom dressed in dove-gray linens, a sitting room with a skyline window, a bathroom as large as my kitchen. I touched the glass. Cold dots embedded in it glittered like stars. "Armored," he said. "Pretty, but strong." He stopped at the threshold, careful. He never crossed into a room without invitation. Only when he turned to leave did I let the shard in my throat out. "You're a murderer." He paused, profile sharp against the city light. "I don't miss," he said calmly. He opened a drawer, drew out a small black ledger, and slid it onto the table. "Neither did your husband. He aimed at you with paper." This was his gun. My pulse stumbled. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, transactions, initials, offshore accounts. A line marked collateral assurance with a sum attached to my name. He had sold me. Rage bloomed dark, almost bigger than grief. Adrian's voice was quiet. "He made you currency. I make you treaty. I didn't ask to be made anything. I know. It wasn't apology. It was worse, recognition. But the treaty stands." I shut the ledger slowly, carefully, as if its poison could spill. Rafe will stand outside. Lucia will bring food you won't want but must eat. The card is yours. Permission is yours. He lingered in the doorway. Ask for what you need. Ask also for what you won't get. Sometimes the second teaches more. And you? I asked. 3 calls. 2 fires. If I do it right, no one burns. He left. The door sealed quietly. I touched the piano and let one note ring. Middle C. It trembled through the empty rooms like a question no one would answer. Later, Lucia came bearing tea and biscotti. She made me drink, her eyes steady. Starving is surrender, she said. She placed a small box on the table. For your daughter, a saint medal. Not because saints fix things, because children like shiny circles. The mention of Emma cracked me. My neighbor had texted earlier. A picture of her in pink socks watching cartoons. Safe. I clutched that safety like a life raft. A bell rang softly. Lucia opened the door to a florist's boy with rain-dark hair who avoided my eyes. He handed over a bouquet wrapped in black tissue. Lucia tipped him and shut the door. She peeled the tissue back with surgeon's care. White lilies, 3 of them stark as bone. Not wedding flowers. Funeral flowers. Bound with black thread. Beneath them, a card. No words, only a broken star. Lucia's mouth was a flat line. Bratva, she said quietly. Funeral lilies. A message. My voice shook. What does it say? It says, widow not yours to keep. The lilies filled the room with a thick, metallic sweetness, as if they had already begun to rot. I folded my hands to keep them from trembling. The city pressed against the glass, listening. The veil still ghosted in my reflection. Numbness shifted. Anger breathed. And something else stirred, dangerous and alive. Reluctant fascination with the man who had pulled me into his cage. The first thing I noticed was how quiet power could be. Not shouted, not flaunted, not even disguised. It simply moved with its own gravity, pulling everything else into orbit. Adrian stood in the control room surrounded by walls of glass screens. Each one showed a different slice of the perimeter. A gate swallowing rainwater, a camera angled toward rooftops, the slow arc of headlights sweeping across wet cobblestone. Men moved like chess pieces outside, disciplined, predictable. Overlapping patrol routes blinked in lines of red and white across the monitors. He spoke into a headset with calm precision. No wasted words, no emotion. Rotate Sector 3. Delay at East Alley. Rafe, move left 10 paces. His eyes flicked from screen to screen as if reading sheet music only he could hear. I stood in the doorway, a mug of untouched tea cooling in my hands. Something about the steadiness of him unsettled me more than violence would have. The storm outside rattled glass, and still his voice stayed level, slicing clean through static. A shape moved on the far monitor, a blur at the fence line. My stomach tightened. Unidentified trespasser. One of his men reported. West corner. Adrian leaned closer, rewound the feed with one flick of his fingers. A figure in a soaked hoodie crouched against the wall. Thin frame, knees knocking. Not armed, at least not visibly. Orders? Came the question. I expected him to say shoot. It was what his reputation demanded. But he didn't. Floodlight, then release the dog, Adrian said calmly. Non-lethal. Make sure he knows the way out. I blinked, almost disbelieving. Minutes later the screen flared white with floodlight, and the figure scrambled. Panicked. A shepherd lunged toward him on a taut leash, barking sharp and furious. The trespasser bolted, scaling the wall faster than fear should have allowed. Done, the man reported. Adrian's lips curved faintly, a gesture of satisfaction without gloating. He removed the headset and set it neatly on the console. I found my voice. Why not just shoot him? He turned, his expression unreadable. Because he was hungry, not dangerous. A corpse feeds no one. A warning feeds many. The mug in my hand shook slightly. I tried to hide it by sipping cold tea. For the first time, the sharp outline of my hatred blurred. Not erased, not excused, but blurred. Respect was a traitor, and yet there it was. He noticed. He always noticed. His gaze lingered on me, measuring. Then he said only, "You shouldn't be here alone," and walked out, his coat brushing my sleeve as he passed. Dinner was an ambush, not of bullets but of patience. The dining room stretched long and narrow, lined with oil portraits whose eyes followed every move. Adrian sat at the head, posture erect, a glass of wine untouched before him. I sat midway down the table, distance enforced not by his command but my own decision. Between us sat a chessboard. The pieces gleamed ivory and obsidian, carved so finely they looked alive. He had set it there before the meal, as casually as if he always ate with war on the table. We played. His opening moves were clean, efficient. I countered cautiously, mind circling the board while trying not to notice the way candlelight threw shadows across his jaw. He moved his bishop with confidence, eyes flicking up once to meet mine. "You're cautious," he observed. "I'm not playing for conquest," I said. "Everyone plays for conquest. They just name it survival." The game tightened, pieces swallowed. I feigned carelessness, sacrificed a pawn. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing at the bait. A knight lunged. I snapped my queen into position. His knight fell. For the first time since I'd met him, Adrian laughed. Not cruelly, not sharply. Just a low, surprised sound, as though delight had ambushed him. He leaned back, tipping his glass in my direction. "You're not prey." The words were simple. But something in his tone, something careful, deliberate, made them more. Consent. Recognition. I stared at the board, not trusting myself to answer. The match ended in stalemate, a truth neither of us admitted aloud. He cleared the pieces with methodical hands, brushing ivory into onyx as if to remind me that opposites eventually return to the same box. Lucia's kitchen smelled of garlic and rosemary, warmth trapped in stone walls. She moved slowly but surely, stirring a pot of broth as though feeding her family were a form of rebellion against centuries. I sat at the table, hands curled around a chipped mug, watching her as she cut bread with a knife worn thin by time. "Men like him," she said without looking up, "are storms." Her knife sliced clean. "You cannot stop a storm. You build a house that bends." I shook my head. "Why tell me this? Why not tell him to be less of a storm?" Her eyes flicked up, steel gray, sharp. "Because the sea never apologizes. Only the sailor learns to bend the sail." She placed a small box in front of me. Inside lay a tarnished silver medal, the figure of a saint barely visible. "It was his mother's," Lucia said softly. "She gave it to me when she knew she would not return. I give it to you because I am old, and old women have no use for saints. But young women still pretend they do." The medal was cool against my palm, heavy with grief I had not asked to carry. Lucia smiled faintly. "Storms break houses made of stone. Houses that bend with the wind survive." I clutched the medal and thought of Emma, sleeping in a house with thin walls and borrowed locks. My chest tightened with a prayer I did not believe in. The piano waited for me like a confidant. Its keys gleamed under the dim light, patient, forgiving. I sat at the bench, fingers hovering, then pressed into Debussy's Clair de Lune. Notes spilled like water, soft and luminous, filling the silence with something almost human. Adrian entered halfway through, silent as shadow. He didn't interrupt. He stood near the window, watching the storm bleed into night. When I ended the piece, he didn't applaud, didn't speak. He only said, "Play again." I did. The second time my hands shook less. When I finally stopped, he rolled up his sleeves slightly, distracted, as if heat had caught him. That was when I saw it, the scar. A jagged line carved deep into his shoulder, pale against his skin. "What happened?" I asked before I could stop myself. He looked down at it, then at me, and for the first time his mask slipped. "Not much, but enough." My father's car caught fire, he said quietly. I pulled him out. You were a child? 12. Old enough to know fire, young enough to think I was immortal. His gaze drifted. He survived. Barely. But I still smell gasoline when it rains. The admission hung in the air, raw and heavy. It was the first memory he had given me, unsharpened by calculation. I realized then that even men like him bled in ways invisible to cameras and contracts. The storm of bullets came without warning. I was in the lobby, speaking to a neighbor who had brought her child. A boy with restless legs and wide brown eyes. He clutched a toy car, running it along the seams of the marble floor. His mother apologized for intruding. I told her she wasn't. Then the glass cracked like ice underfoot. A sharp hiss. Star-shaped fractures spread across the armored window. Suppressed shots, barely audible over the rain, but unmistakable. The boy froze, eyes huge. His toy car dropped, clattering. I didn't think. I lunged, pulling him against me, curling my body over his. His mother screamed, clutching his legs. The world tilted in shards of panic. And then Adrian was there. He shoved me down, covering me with his own body, heavier than stone, shielding. The smell of gun oil and rain enveloped me, his heartbeat thunder steady against my shoulder. His voice was sharp into his headset. Sector 3 breach. Rafe, suppress. Now, shouts crackled. The thud of feet. Another suppressed pop, closer. Adrian dragged us toward a concealed panel. It opened into a steel-lined corridor. The boy sobbed against my chest as his mother stumbled behind us. We reached a safe room lit only by emergency strips. Adrian shut the door, eyes scanning me first, then the child. Unhurt. I nodded, though my pulse roared too loud to hear. Outside, Rafe's voice thundered orders. Men returning fire. A silence followed, taut and final. Adrian pressed his forehead briefly to the steel wall, exhaling once. Then he looked back at me. You shouldn't have been in the lobby. I was talking to a child. I spat, trembling. Forgive me for forgetting your war spills everywhere. He didn't rise to the anger. He simply crouched, adjusting the boy's shoelaces, his massive presence oddly gentle. Then he stood and left without another word, sealing the door behind him. Silence returned, broken only by the boy's hiccuped cries. My hands shook as I smoothed his hair, heart still thundering. And then, muffled in the corner of the room, a sound that froze me colder than gunfire. A phone buzzed. I turned. On the shelf lay a burner, cheap plastic, one I had never seen before. The screen glowed with a single text. From Mark. My stomach dropped. The message read, "If you're reading this, I'm sorry." The world tilted again. Was it a scheduled message? A ghost's confession? Or proof that the man I had buried in the rain wasn't done with me after all? The burner phone glowed in the dim light, its hum faint but steady, as though the dead still had breath. My hands shook as I reached for it, each step pulling me toward a truth I did not want but could not escape. The child in the corner whimpered into his mother's arms, but all I could hear was the pulse in my ears and the rain clawing against the walls. The message was simple. If you're reading this, I'm sorry. My throat tightened. Beneath the words was an attachment. My thumb hovered over the screen, hesitation thick in my chest, then pressed. CCTV stills spilled onto the display. Grainy, shadowed, but unmistakable. Mark, my husband, the man I had buried in blood and rain, shaking hands with Konstantin Kosta-Baranov, the rival who had sent funeral lilies, the predator circling at the edges of every silence. In one image, Mark leaned close, his mouth caught mid-word, desperation etched across his face. In another, Costa grinned like a wolf who knew the lamb was cornered. The final file was a scanned note, messy script slanting hard, written by Mark's hand. I had no choice. The debt was too deep. They wanted you. It was the only way. I'm sorry. The words gutted me. A betrayal so sharp it cleaved the grief I'd been carrying into something rawer, crueler. He had planned to sell me like currency in exchange for his own survival. The husband I had loved, who had kissed my hand and wrapped cheap silver around my neck, had put a price on me. The storm outside paled compared to the storm inside my chest. The door clicked behind me. Adrian stepped into the safe room, his presence swallowing the space, rain dripping from his coat. He saw the phone in my hand, the pallor in my face, and his jaw tightened. "You knew," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I suspected." "You knew," I repeated, louder, almost a scream. He crossed the room, unhurried, and took the phone from my hand. He glanced at the images only briefly, as though they were not new to him. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small device. He pressed a button, and the safe room filled with sound. The crackle of static, the rustle of fabric. And then I heard it. Mark's voice, stammering, panicked. "You don't understand. I can fix this." The sound of a gun cocking. Adrian's reply, cold and steady. "You reached for it. You knew better." A single shot echoed, followed by silence. The recording ended. Adrian's eyes found mine. He wasn't unarmed. He wasn't innocent. He reached for a gun. I don't miss. I wanted to scream at him, to claw at the stone calm in his voice. But the images on the phone and the words in Mark's note burned through me, undeniable. My husband hadn't just betrayed me, he had bartered me. Adrian hadn't lied about that. Betrayal curdled into clarity. The man I had thought was my anchor had been the weight dragging me under. I sat down hard on the bench, my breath coming shallow. The metal Lucia had given me cold against my chest. Adrian didn't approach. He simply stood there, rain dripping from his sleeve onto the floor, waiting. And for the first time I realized he was giving me space, not as a kindness but as a rule he would not break. The next morning, I found him in the library. The curtains were open, letting in weak gray light. A map sprawled across the table, littered with markers and notes written in his hand. Rafe hovered nearby, grim-faced, murmuring updates. I didn't wait for them to finish. "No more lies," I said firmly, my voice cutting into the room. "If I'm staying in this treaty, I want space to work. I want to help stop Costa." Rafe's brows shot up, but Adrian only looked at me, unreadable. "And," he asked, "and you grant me veto power," I pressed. "No violence near hospitals. No blood through those doors. If you want me bound to you, then I get a say in how you use your war." Rafe muttered something about risk, but Adrian lifted a hand, silencing him. He studied me like one might study a foreign script, deciphering piece by piece. Then he reached for his pen, turned over a ledger page, and wrote my terms down in his precise script. He signed his name beneath them. "Done," he said. He slid the page toward me, the ink still wet. Signed. Not kissed. It wasn't romance. It was something sharper, something stranger. A bargain rewritten in the language of survival. I signed too, my initials bleeding slightly where my hand trembled. And for the first time we were allies, not by accident, not by ultimatum, but by agreement. Detective Soria found me 2 days later. It was late evening, the penthouse hushed, Adrian out on one of his endless circuits of meetings. I had slipped down to the garden terrace to breathe air that wasn't filtered through fear. That's where she appeared, a shadow at the gate before stepping into light. Her coat was soaked through, her badge glinting faintly in her pocket. Her eyes, sharp and unwavering, locked on mine. "Elena Vale," she said. "I don't have long." My heart stuttered. "How did you?" "I go where I need to." She cut me off. "And you're running out of choices." She stepped closer, voice low and urgent. "Turn evidence. Give me what I need, and I can free you. Witness protection, relocation. You and your daughter, new names, new lives. You don't have to be their hostage." Hope flared for a fraction of a second, then curdled under the weight of reality. "Free me," I whispered. "To whose hands? You take me away, but the Bratva still exists. Costa still exists. Do you think a new zip code stops a wolf from hunting?" Soria's jaw tightened. "At least you wouldn't be in his cage." I touched the Saint metal at my neck, words spilling out before I could stop them. "Cages are everywhere. At least here, I know the bars." Her eyes softened, just a fraction, as if she saw the trap I lived in and hated that she couldn't undo it. She pressed a card into my palm. "If you change your mind, burn this. My people will see it." And then she was gone, swallowed by the night, leaving me with the weight of impossible choices pressing down harder than ever. It was close to midnight when Adrian returned, his steps uneven, his coat torn. I caught sight of the dark stain on his sleeve and my heart lurched. "Sit," I ordered before he could brush past. He gave me a sharp look, the kind that usually silenced men, but I didn't waver. He obeyed, lowering himself onto the piano bench with the stiffness of pain. Blood seeped through the fabric. I fetched the first aid kit, my fingers steady though my breath shook. He watched me in silence as I cleaned the wound, iodine sharp in the air. "Who did this?" I asked. "Costa's men, or mercenaries bought with his money." His voice was flat, but his jaw was clenched. The cut was deep but clean. I threaded the needle, my hands brushing his skin as I worked. His body was tense under my touch, muscles tight as cables, but he didn't flinch. The smell of leather and rain clung to him, mixing with antiseptic. Our faces were close, too close. His breath ghosted against my cheek. The silence between us wasn't empty. It was thick, charged, alive with something I didn't want to name. When I tied the last stitch, my fingers lingered for a heartbeat too long. His eyes caught mine, ice and fire both, and for a moment the world narrowed to that closeness, to the magnetic pull between defiance and surrender. I almost leaned in. Almost. Instead, I pulled back sharply, shaking my head. "Not like this," I whispered. He exhaled slowly, as though restraining something heavy. Then he nodded once, accepting. He rose, slower now, and left the room without another word. I sat on the bench long after, the piano silent, my hands trembling. The following morning, a package arrived. It wasn't flowers this time, but a small black box delivered by a courier who vanished before questions could be asked. Inside was a phone already playing a video. The image filled the screen. Nana Lucia, bound to a chair, her eyes steady despite the bruise blooming on her temple. Behind her, the Bratva emblem hung on a wall, unmistakable. Costa's voice filled the room, smooth and venomous. "Bring yourself to the bridge," he drawled. "Alone. Or the old woman dies." The video ended. The screen went dark. My blood turned to ice. The Saint metal at my neck felt heavier than iron. The war wasn't waiting anymore. It was here. And now the choice wasn't mine alone, it was hers too. The video of Nana looped in my head until the walls of the penthouse felt like they were closing in. Her gray hair pulled back, her lips pressed in dignity even as the Bratva's emblem loomed behind her. Costa's voice had slithered over the recording, every syllable designed to slice. "Bring yourself to the bridge. Alone." Adrian wanted war. Rafe wanted blood. But I wanted her back alive, and I knew neither of them could see what I saw. There were ways to fight that didn't end in rivers choked with bodies. I sat at the piano bench, the Saint metal heavy against my chest, and drew a crude sketch on the back of one of Adrian's ledgers. The bridge stretched in lines of steel across the paper, a cage suspended over water. "The fog will be thick tomorrow night," I murmured, "and sound carries differently under the girders. It bends, distorts. If we use the acoustics, if we misdirect." Rafe frowned over my shoulder. His presence was massive, his voice gravel. "Misdirection buys seconds. That's not survival. Seconds are enough if we control them, I snapped, sharper than I meant. I tapped the sketch. Here. Speakers mounted under the arch. Costa won't know where the danger is. And here, flashbangs in the river, not on the bridge. Water amplifies the concussion, blinds from below, scares, scatters. But no one dies unless they choose to fall. Rafe grunted, unconvinced. That's theater, not strategy. Sometimes theater wins wars, I said, surprising even myself with the steel in my voice. He wants me, fine. He'll get me. But not on his terms. Adrian entered then, silent as shadow. His eyes scanned the table, the sketch, my face. He read me too easily. No, he said flatly. Absolutely not. You don't walk into his hands. If I don't, Nana dies. Then we take her by force. We storm the building, drag him into the open. And then what? I demanded. More corpses? More blood through hospital doors. That's not my treaty, Adrian. My terms. Remember? His jaw locked. He looked at me as though torn between fury and something else. Fear, maybe, though he'd never name it. My terms, I repeated, voice trembling but steady. Or she dies. The silence stretched like a wire. Finally, he exhaled, sharp, resigned. He looked at Rafe. Prep it. Exactly as she says. Rafe opened his mouth, but Adrian's glare cut him off. The plan was mine. The risk was mine. The choice, finally, was mine. The night came with fog that swallowed sound and blurred edges. The bridge stretched out above the river like the spine of some ancient beast, groaning under the weight of mist and memory. Sodium lamps glowed weak orange, halos bleeding into the air. Water slapped rhythmically below, an unkind heartbeat. I walked alone toward the midpoint, every step loud against steel. The veil of fog closed behind me like a curtain, hiding whatever waited beyond. My palms were slick with sweat. The Saint metal pressed into my chest, hot now, not cold. At the far end, a shape emerged, two shapes. Costa, tall and broad, dragging Nana by the arm. A pistol gleamed in his hand, pressed cruelly against her ribs. Her face was pale but steady. Elena Vale, he called, his accent curling around my name like barbed wire. How generous of you to come. Alone, just as I asked. I forced my voice not to shake. You wanted me. You have me. Let her go. He laughed, harsh and metallic. So brave. So stupid. Your husband begged like a dog for your life. And now you deliver yourself for an old woman. Men are selfish. Women suicidal. I kept walking until I was 10 feet away, close enough to see the veins in his hand. The fog thickened, the lamps above flickering as if they too feared him. And then the world fractured. From beneath the bridge, a siren wailed, detuned, discordant, howling like a wounded animal. The sound bent in the fog, echoing off steel until it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Costa cursed, jerking his head. The river below erupted, white flashes bursting upward, water spraying in violent plumes. The bridge shook, shuddering. For a moment, it felt like the whole world might collapse into the river. Costa staggered, his grip loosening. That was my moment. I lunged forward and drove my forehead into his nose with everything I had. Pain lanced through my skull, white hot, but his cry was louder. His grip on Nana slackened. She twisted, bit his wrist, sharp and fierce like a cornered wolf. The gun clattered to the ground. Run! I shouted, shoving her back. Costa swung at me, catching my jaw with the heel of his hand. I reeled, vision splitting. He reached for the fallen gun, and Adrian appeared through the fog. Unarmed, just as I had demanded. His presence was thunder without sound. His eyes locked on mine for one breath, one heartbeat. He moved forward, calm, predatory, hands open. Costa snarled, blood streaking his face, and fired wildly. The shot missed, ricocheting off steel, sparks showering into fog. Adrian closed the distance with brutal speed, seizing Costa's arm and twisting until bone cracked. But Costa slipped free, shoving hard, and bolted into the mist. Rafe's men closed in from the shadows, but too late. Costa vanished into the fog, wounded but alive. Adrian didn't chase him. He went to Nana first, his hands surprisingly gentle as he steadied her trembling frame. Then his eyes found me, checking, measuring, before he allowed the faintest exhale of relief. The bridge groaned again, swallowing the echoes of violence. We had survived. Barely. The aftermath came swiftly. Police sirens cut through the night, red and blue washing over fog. Among the officers was Detective Soria, coat flapping, eyes sharp as knives. She had seen everything. She cornered me as Adrian spoke low with his men. Her voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "You're clever. I'll give you that. But clever doesn't buy forever." She pressed a folded paper into my hand. "You have 48 hours. Deliver me Moretti's ledgers, proof of his operation, or I put you under RICO with the rest of them." My throat tightened. "If I don't, then you burn with him," she said flatly. "Your daughter too. Witness protection won't take the widow of a capo unless she proves she's not part of the rot." She walked away before I could answer, her badge catching the glow of fog. When I returned to Adrian, he was waiting, silent. I handed him the paper. His eyes flicked over it, then back to me. "RICO," he muttered, almost to himself. "They've been circling for years." I met his gaze unflinching. "We survived this together, Adrian. Not by burying the city in blood. If you want me in this cage, then we burn the rot out, not the streets." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he reached into his coat, pulled out a leather-bound folder, and placed it in my hands. "These are the true ledgers," he said. "Not the ones the accountants feed the men. These show where the money goes, what reforms I've already started, what I've stolen back from Costa's pockets, which police wear his leash." I opened it and saw columns of names, figures, payments. Evidence not just of crime but of an attempt, however flawed, however bloody, to change it. "You could destroy me with these," he said softly. "Or save us both," I replied. The fog began to lift. The bridge loomed silent above us, a skeleton of steel and secrets. And beneath it, war still waited. The city didn't wait long to remind us. 2 nights later, the power grid flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness fell like a blade across streets and homes. Hospitals. My phone buzzed in my hand. A single message flashing before the screen went black with the rest of the city. "Costa, the hospital is next. Come watch your oath burn." The hospital plunged into darkness like a ship slipping beneath the sea. The lights flickered once, then failed. The hum of machines died. Monitors flatlined in a discordant chorus. Panic rippled through the ER as doctors shouted, nurses scrambled, and families clutched at each other in the sudden void. I held up my phone, its weak glow cutting a narrow path through the chaos. "Generators," someone yelled. But the backup thrum was sluggish, late, struggling to catch. "Phones out. Radios jammed," another voice cracked. "Quiet," I shouted, louder than I ever thought possible. My voice cut through the din like a blade. "We've done this before. Battery packs, manual bags, prioritize oxygen. Pediatrics first. Move," the staff rallied. A nurse I barely knew clutched my hand as though it was an anchor. I pulled free gently, steadying her shoulders. "Light the hallways. We're not blind, we're not helpless." And we weren't. For all the terror, muscle memory took over. We triaged in shadows, voices guiding us where lights couldn't. I held the flashlight between my teeth as I stitched, guided by sound and instinct. Every second was a gamble against death, but the rhythm of medicine held. Outside, another rhythm pulsed. The crackle of radios, the shuffle of boots, the distant bark of orders. Adrian's men. And Adrian himself, holding the perimeter against Costa's advance. But no gunshots, no body count. He had honored my terms. Non-lethal. Rafe's voice crackled faintly from a jammed line, jamming his frequencies, scattering his men. Buying time. Time was all I needed. Until it wasn't. The doors to pediatrics banged open with a violence that stole the breath from the room. Costa stood framed in the doorway, face pale from the wound Adrian had given him on the bridge, eyes fever-bright with vengeance. His pistol swept the room. Children cried. Nurses froze. My body moved before my mind did. I stepped forward, blocking his path. "Elena," he hissed, "always in the way." "I won't leave them," I said, voice steady though my knees shook. "Not one of them." He smirked, cruel, and pressed the barrel against my chest. "Then you'll die with them." The moment stretched, brittle as glass. Adrian arrived at a run, skidding to a stop at the end of the corridor. He was unarmed because I had demanded it. His eyes locked on mine for one fraction of a heartbeat, then shifted to Costa. "Take me," Adrian said, hands raised, palms empty. "You want revenge, you want an ending, here it is. Kill me, not her. Leave them." Costa laughed, jagged and bitter. "You think you're worth more alive than she is dead?" Adrian's voice didn't waver. "I think you're afraid of a world without me to fight." For the first time, Costa's gun wavered. The rage in his eyes flickered into doubt, then back into fire. He aimed at Adrian, and then the window behind him shattered. One shot, clean, precise. Glass sprayed the floor like diamonds. Costa jerked forward, the bullet finding its mark through his chest. He fell, gun clattering, blood blooming across the tiles. Through the broken glass, Detective Soria lowered her weapon. Her face was stone. He crossed my line. The room held its breath as Costa bled out. Adrian didn't move, though the open path to escape gaped before him. He could have run. He could have vanished into the city's underbelly, leaving me to patch lives in the ruins. But he didn't. He dropped to his knees slowly, deliberately, and held out his wrists. The officers poured in, cuffing him without ceremony. He didn't resist. I moved forward, my coat slipping from my shoulders. Without thinking, I draped it over him. Not to hide the chains, but to remind the room and myself that this choice was his. For once, no one commanded me. No one forced me. And for once, I chose. The courthouse smelled of dust and old paper, the walls sweating history. Adrian sat across from the prosecutor, wrists free now but the weight of his choices pressing heavier than chains. Soria stood at the window, arms crossed, watching. He slid a folder across the table. "Every shell company, every front I built. They're yours now. Shut them down, bleed them dry." Another folder. Names of dirty cops Costa owned. Some wear uniforms, some don't. "You'll find enough rot to keep the city busy for years." The prosecutor flipped through the pages, eyes widening at the scale. "This is enough to bring down half the syndicate." "More than half," Adrian said. "And you?" Soria asked quietly. He met her gaze, unflinching. "Limited charges. Restitution. I sign over assets to rebuild what we broke. Schools. Hospitals. A pact that keeps blood off those grounds. You want my storm? Fine. But storms can learn where to reign." Soria studied him, then glanced at me. "And you trust him?" I touched the Saint medal at my throat, then set it on the table between us. "I trust that he gave me the choice. And I trust what people do when they're finally free of lies." Nana's voice echoed in my memory. "A storm learned where to reign." The prosecutor exhaled slowly. "We'll draft it." Adrian leaned back, eyes closing briefly, as though carrying a weight that was finally being set down. Months later, the city was greener than I had ever seen it. A community garden bloomed where a burned-out lot once rotted. Children ran between rows of tomatoes and basil, laughter spilling into the warm air. The sign read, funded by anonymous donors. Everyone knew who. No one said it. I sat at the piano set up in the garden's pavilion, my fingers finding Debussy again, softer this time, the notes falling like sunlight on leaves. Families listened. Some knew my face. Some didn't. It didn't matter. Adrian was there, leaner now, shoulders less heavy with armor, though shadows never fully left his eyes. He waited at the edge, hands clasped behind his back, patient. When the music ended, he approached. We didn't need a priest, a registrar, or a ledger. We had a courtyard, ivy climbing the walls, Nana watching with a smile that was half pride, half relief. He took my hands in his, warm and steady. No debts, no threats. Just this. Just this. I echoed. We whispered vows to each other. Not contracts, not bargains, not shields. Promises we could actually keep. And then, finally, with no gun between us, no storm at our backs, we kissed. Consent, not coercion. Chosen, not forced. For the first time since the night my world ended, I felt not captured, but free. Later, as the last guests drifted away and the ivy shadows stretched long, my phone buzzed. A message from Soria. A photo, a rooftop across the street. A figure watching through binoculars. A new face. A new threat. Her text read, "Storms don't end, Elena. They just move." I looked up at Adrian, who stood beside me, his hand finding mine. Not captive. Not coerced. Chosen. And I tightened my grip. And I tightened my grip. And I tightened my grip.